We're letting it roll, fellas. Let the music roll. The Boston Celtics defeat the Detroit Pistons for their second straight win, 130 to 120. After a couple days rest, Pistons here coming on a second night of a back-to-back. The Celtics playing without Jason Tatum and Drew Holiday, both sitting out tonight. Mainly precautionary. We'll get into their injuries and a lot more here tonight. I'm Justin. That's Xavier. That's Seamus. The X-Man's back on the show. Welcome back. Guys, how are we feeling? X, we'll start with you, my man. Celtics get a big win here.
I feel pretty good. I mean, every time I watch this team, I'm reminded just how talented they are because even without their best player, they go out there and have a 10-point win. And at times, there's a little bit of a struggle, especially after that great start. At times, it looked a little concerning. But at the end of the day, they get the win. And look, it's one of those things that this is a long season. This is the reigning champions. You know they're not going to play their A game every day. And if they can continuously play their C+, B- game and win decisively, that really makes me confident for where this season is going.
Yeah, I think tonight we came out in this one, scored 39 points in the first quarter, and I was looking at this game going, all right, it's going to be a solid night without Jason Tatum, even without him and Drew Holiday, the Celtics. We might roll over the Pistons here tonight at home, but the rest of the game, little up and down for me personally. I mean, really that fourth quarter, I want to see a better performance in that fourth quarter from the Celtics. 17-3 run from the Pistons. What I did like about the fourth quarter, however, is the fact the Celtics, once it was a 6-point game, Rob said it in our group chat, of course, they stopped the bleeding and really closed the game out down the stretch and made it a no-doubter. The last 30 seconds of the game, it wasn't a foul situation. It was, oh, the Celtics are up by 10, and that's just the way the game is going to end. So you can't be too mad about what happened in this game because the Celtics were really leading throughout, and it really was never in doubt. You want to see them close it a little more cleanly because for the bulk of this game, they really had it in the bag. Now, the Pistons, of course, did win the second quarter and the fourth quarter, but the Celtics, very strong showing in that first quarter. And then, of course, in the second half, that third quarter, and then going into the fourth, really rejuvenating themselves once they let the Pistons back in the game. And that was really due to a hot streak by the Pistons shooting from three. And I'm even glad Sam Hauser after the game, even the game he had, we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but Sam Hauser, for the offensive game that he had, the first thing he said in his post-game interview was, we need to defend the three-point line better. So I'm glad to hear that out of him and the rest of the team, of course. So even though the Celtics, maybe not the cleanest of wins, still a win is a win.
A win is a win, and although it was a 10-point win in the box score, you did mention, Seamus, that throughout the course of this 48-minute game, the Celtics had full and complete control. Let's take a look at tonight's lead tracker via NBA.com. The Boston Celtics had the biggest lead of 20 tonight. The Detroit Pistons, you see 0. I mean, there was just no lead tonight whatsoever. I was saying to Xavier, I thought for some reason I just imagined the Pistons scoring first, but that wasn't the case tonight. And you mentioned that strong first quarter, Seamus, for the Boston Celtics. That's when they nearly led by 20 early on. They got off to that extremely hot start. And I do want to mention to you guys about the hot start because it seems as if the Celtics have not been getting off to these great starts, Xavier. Tonight, that wasn't the case. The Celtics, pretty strong start, especially without Jason Tatum. So it was really nice to see that from this team.
Well, I think they mentioned it on the broadcast a few times. Often in these Celtics games, they launch threes right away. It's constant. Yeah. It's like an onslaught early on. And if they go in, they tend to have a little bit of a lead. The other coach calls a timeout, and then the Celtics get a little cold. And that feels like a recipe that happens constantly with this team. And tonight, I think they were a little bit more balanced. And we could talk about the three-point shooting a little bit later because the final number looked as what we've come to expect with this team, 53 threes. But I feel like it was a little bit more natural today than it was in prior games. And that can sound however you want it to. But I think when you have Porzingis down low, he's such a presence. And I think the most underrated part about Porzingis, he only had 2 assists, but he is a good passer. And I think he's a good hockey assist guy. Like he makes the pass that sets up the next pass. And I think going through a big like Porzingis who can pass, especially if you have Horford next to him, who is a good passer in his own right, you can kind of get those slot cuts, as Scal loves to call them. And you can get a guy like Hauser roaming towards the rim, and then you can kind of find that three if you want, or you can get the layup. And I think when the Celtics do that, that's when you see this quote unquote Missoula ball work at its best level. I think too often, especially the last few weeks, they come out and all they want to do is jack up threes. And I understand that that's the philosophy, and I understand the analytics behind it. But at some point, I think they need to kind of refine this offense a little bit. I think they're getting a little bit too trigger happy. And I thought tonight was a good happy medium for most of the game.
I would completely agree with Xavier on that point, because there were a couple of games in the past, especially this season, where you're just looking at the Celtics going, the whole point is to penetrate the paint and shoot open threes, not just jack up threes randomly contested, because they did fall into that trap quite a few times this season already. And those are really the games we look back at and go, not the best shooting performance from three. But the reality is, we saw it in 21-22. I think that was the best example of a team going from the beginning portion of the season. The Celtics, yes, they were shooting threes. The back portion of the season, the type of threes they were getting after the trade deadline, after they shipped Dennis Schroeder, shipped Josh Richardson out for Derek White, and then Daniel Tice. The entire offense looked different after those two players came into the equation in the Celtics. They were creating open threes. Everybody was questioning, how are the Celtics making all these extra 3-point shots that season, even though they're taking the same volume, they're taking the same type of shots. Well, the reality was they weren't the same type of shots at all. They were really open threes that second half of the season. And now that's really what the discrepancy is when we see the Celtics either shoot well or we don't see them shoot well. And the Pistons, give them credit tonight. They shot pretty nicely from three, and they outshot the Celtics in a sense, although the Celtics, they had more of a volume from three tonight. But the Celtics, as of late this season, I think we're seeing too much of that. Oh, we just want to go out there and shoot threes, and that's our philosophy. But sometimes guys forget we want to shoot open threes, and that really, it comes with driving to the bucket aggressively, penetrating the paint, collapsing the defense. And I want to give a big shout out to Jaylen Brown, because I believe he's been doing fantastic job at that the last two games. And of course, Jason Tatum too. We saw it in Cleveland on Sunday and then on Monday as well. But he, of course, didn't play tonight. But those two guys, they're really the catalyst of doing that for this Celtics offense. And as of late, they've done a better job at doing so, and really not just letting the team settle from three, but it really all starts with them being aggressive, driving the paint. Peyton Pritchard, too. He's been just ultra aggressive as well, going towards the hole. But that's what we want to see. It starts with getting downhill, penetrating the paint, drawing multiple defenders to one guy, and then boom, we have all those guys on the outside. And Xavier, you even mentioned it too, the help that Kristaps Porzingis brings to that equation is huge, because not only is he a three-point shooter from beyond the arc, he is somebody who can go inside the paint and, as we saw last season, be the most efficient paint scorer in the entire NBA. And that's ultimately why the Celtics team is so dangerous. And we saw a good bit of it tonight. Of course, we could be a little bit better down the stretch in terms of defending the three ball, but in terms of actually scoring, I mean, 130, some of these games, it's like we're talking about, oh, the Celtics in Cleveland, oh, they couldn't pull this game out. Or on Monday, it's like, oh, yeah, we're scoring a ton of points. And that really is the point right now. And we just want to get that defense back up and back to where it was last season.
You talk about Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown tonight was your leading scorer, game high, 28 points, I believe. I don't have the box score right in front of me. When Jaylen Brown, and we talk about JT, but as we mentioned before, JT was out tonight. When Jaylen Brown is able to be aggressive and drop his shoulders and attack the basket, that just opens up the floor for the entire offense, and it makes it so much easier. And then to your point, Xavier, Kristaps Porzingis, with the big man being back after missing 5 months, he's been spectacular since his return. He has done everything and more for the Celtics offense, and it's not just putting the ball through the basket and blocking shots in the defensive end. I remember last year, Xavier, you and I were talking about, and I believe Rob was on the postgame show too, and it was not necessarily a design play that was something that was our favorite, but it was more so a more of a set. And Kristaps Porzingis, when he's at that free throw line, it just totally, I feel as if he has just total control of the floor, whether that's penetrating, backing down his defender, and that playing in the post, one of the best post players offensively in the entire association, or he could swing it out and run the offense through there. So I think that Kristaps Porzingis within itself just creates a totally new offense for the Celtics team. And we had a great offense before KP even came back into the lineup. So I definitely think with Porzingis coming in, you're going to see the Celtics a lot more higher point totals. And it also opens up the floor, not only for guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but for Sam Hauser. Sam Hauser tonight, guys, he is your SeatGeek player of the game. Guys, it is the holiday season. I want to take a quick second to shout out SeatGeek, who is the sponsor of tonight's post-game show. SeatGeek, you can get your tickets. Really, really good, great ticketing app. I use it when I go to my Celtics games. They divvy up the seats. They give you color-coded seats. If you know me, Seamus, I know you. You're a very organized guy. You love your color coding. Good seats, green for good seats, yellow seats for moderate, and then red, obviously, trying to keep you away from those tricky deals on SeatGeek. So they break it all down for you. They're a great ticketing app. Use code Celtics Weekly at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Again, Celtics Weekly at checkout. Now, Sam Hauser, fellas, no Jason Tatum, no Drew Holiday. He gets a start tonight. He comes in and he drops 20 points. And I mean, come on. Absolutely efficient. 2 of 2 from 2-point range, 5 of 10 from 3-point range, 1 of 1 at the free throw line. Had a steal in there as well, attacking the glass. Sam Hauser just about did it all tonight, and he is your SeatGeek player of the game. Seamus, we'll start with you. We talk about this. We were talking about this bench production. We talk about Peyton Pritchard, and Luke Cornett's been playing really well, really good as well. But felt like Sam Hauser's been off recently. Certainly coming out of his shell here tonight is showing you what he's more than capable of, pretty much on an every night basis.
Yeah, Sam Hauser in the beginning portion of this season so far, he's really had his one shooting slump of his entire career, because now we have 2 seasons worth of data of him shooting quite well from 3. And yet coming into this season, those numbers dipped quite a bit. But we all know Sam Hauser, with those 2 seasons of data under his belt, we know his capabilities specifically from the 3-point arc. And 5 of 10 tonight. It's great to see him actually start hitting his 3-point shots and just shots in general, because Sam Hauser, Chris Forsberg said it after the game, he's somebody who consistently plays hard on both ends of the floor, not only on the offensive end, but the defensive end as well. And we talked about it on a post game last week where Sam Hauser, he's part of that group of Celtics that we thought, maybe not the best defenders in the world, but he competes on that end of the floor, and he's been tremendously better at that end of the floor than he was when he first came in with the Celtics as a two-way player. And we all know offensively too, he has a little bit more of an offensive bag within his game now. You see, when he has the ball in his hands, when he first started with the Celtics, he was straight up just catch and shoot, spot up shooter. Now there is a little bit more dribbling within his game. And I'll add another thing on the offensive end with Sam Hauser. He constantly moves on that end of the floor. And that's really what drove me crazy about Celtics teams of the past 2021 and 2022. It was, we just don't have guys who are just moving constantly on offense. We need more movement. And Sam Hauser, he's brought that to this team 100%. And we saw it tonight, especially against the Pistons.
Yeah, as the Celtics honesty broker, Sam's not been that good this season, and I think it's been an issue, and I'm glad to see him starting to find his stride. On the season, he's 33% from deep at home, and this is kind of an NBA adage that role players are supposed to kind of play better at home, and Sam has not played well at home at all. He's only 35% from deep on the season. That's down 7-8% from last year. And I think the problem with him is that I've noticed his movement's fantastic. He's rushing his shot a lot. And I think tonight he was very comfortable just letting his shot go to him. There's this kind of NBA wave of guys trying to shoot as soon as it lands in their fingertips and just kind of go up with it. And I think Hauser was doing a decent job doing that last year, but for whatever reason, it did not translate well at all this year so far. And I think he's kind of going back to his regular shooting motion a little more. And let's put it like this. If he's moving constantly and he's open, he doesn't need to shoot as soon as it touches his fingertips. He can do his dip and go up and he'll be fine. And I think him making that slight tweak, he's 40% from deep over his last 10 games. He's clearly looking a little more like the Hauser that broke out a few years ago, and it was pivotal in the title run last year. And I think that's a guy the Celtics need. Because I think if they're going to continue to play this 5-out basketball, particularly when Porzingis isn't on the floor, they need a guy like Hauser to be that 40% from deep. And I think we saw it, especially there was like a 20-game sample of this already throughout the season. Pritchard is leading the league in bench scoring. We've heard it a million times. He's up by like 60 points in the stat. But for a while, it felt like Pritchard was the only semi-consistent guy coming off the bench. And I think that was a problem for a long time. And if Hauser can slowly get back to being the Hauser that we know, that really solidifies that second unit, because the second unit has been kind of bad for much of the season outside of Pritchard. And I understand why people would overlook that, because Pritchard is getting so many headlines and he deserves them. But at the same time, that is a weakness for the Celtics. So if Hauser can kind of breathe life into that second unit again and be this kind of spot starter that can get you 16 to 20 points on any given night, that just adds that extra dynamic element that the Celtics have really honed in on the last few years.
I think it's so interesting because what Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser have been able to turn into for this team. And we talk about what Sam Hauser has been able to turn into for this team. Seamus, you and I were just talking about it 2 nights ago on the postgame show. These guys who are stepping up, these guys were two-way players. These guys were G League players for the Boston Celtics just a couple of years ago. Sam Hauser comes in undrafted, balls out in the summer league, gets a contract deal from the Celtics, 2-way contract deal. Then, if you guys remember, later in that season, his rookie year, the Celtics had like 5 open roster spots after the trade deadline. So what they do? They brought in Sam Hauser, brought in Luke Cornett, who was on a 2-way deal, and they've been with this team ever since. And it's been so amazing to see these guys grow into such solid role players for a championship, not only championship winning team, but a continuously year after year, a championship contending team. And I think it's a test to, you mentioned once again, Seamus, the development, the coaching staff for this team, and every single player on this roster has improved in their time that they've been here. So credit to Sam Hauser for staying ready, part of that stay ready group. I don't know if you could say he's part of that stay ready group anymore. Coming off the bench, obviously you got to stay ready coming off the bench, but
this year he
is. He's been very spotty at times this season, to say the least, but it was really good to see him kind of come back out of his shell here tonight and really put up a solid performance in a night where you're missing Jason Tatum. And I do want to talk about this, guys, because the production of this team without Tatum on the court, to me, has been an issue. It's when Jason Tatum goes to the bench, Celtics go flat, Celtics go stagnant. Their offense, nothing gets going. Shots aren't falling. Playing very sluggish. Tatum comes back into the game. That's a lot on Jason Tatum's shoulders. What did we see here tonight? I mean, Celtics plus 10 without Jason Tatum, jumped out to a 20-point lead. To me, I know, I get it. Still, even though Celtics missing a couple guys, are significantly better than the Pistons. We know that. But at the same time, I was impressed tonight with how this team played without JT, because, as I mentioned, it's been an issue when Jason Tatum is not on the court for this team.
Yeah, when Jason Tatum is not on the court, it feels like this team is missing a playmaker out there, which, of course, we have some pretty good playmakers on the squad in general. We have Derek White, Drew Holiday can be that guy at times, but ultimately no Drew Holiday, no Jason Tatum tonight. And it does feel like there is somewhat of a deficit in playmaking out on the floor, where we don't have our top guy, and it's more of your turn, my turn situation, not necessarily in scoring, but in terms of being that playmaker. And Jaylen Brown, for as good of a player as he is, he just doesn't quite have the same feel for the offense as Jason Tatum. And I shouldn't say maybe not the same feel, but he's not asked to do exactly what Jason Tatum is asked to do out on the floor as a playmaker. Jason Tatum, of course, is averaging a career high in assists this season. So in the Celtics, they've played most of the time with Jason Tatum. It's all funneling through Tatum. Yet tonight, I thought we saw a more well-rounded experience from the Celtics, and everybody really getting involved, and everybody getting involved in the scoring in terms of it didn't quite run through one player as often as we've seen, which that player to be Jason Tatum. And Jason Tatum, of course, is very good at dishing out to everybody else, and this team really has a good chemistry and continuity with each other, making those extra passes, extra assists, and getting that wide open shot that they want. tonight I felt like the team did a tremendous job of replacing Jason Tatum as more of a platoon. Now you could say Jaylen Brown was, of course, the number one guy for the Celtics tonight, and he had a tremendous night as well. We have Sam Hauser as the player of the game, but if Sam Hauser, if he misses 2 more threes, I think we're looking at Jaylen Brown as the player of the game. If Sam Hauser is 3 of 10 from beyond the arc, we're probably putting Jaylen Brown at the top of the screen right now. So Jaylen Brown, of course, led the way for the Celtics from that standpoint, but I thought it was more of a wide open effort from the team in general. And we really needed to see that the other night in Cleveland, and we just didn't quite see it, unfortunately. Now, Jaylen Brown and Derek White, they were out, and tonight they were both in the game. Peyton Pritchard, of course, still out there in the game. They take over a big responsibility as well. But the Celtics, without Jason Tatum, definitely a positive point tonight to see the bench step up in the way they did. And even look at past performances of the Celtics bench, it's just really hasn't been there at all this season. Xavier, you mentioned it. It's mostly just Pritchard. If you look at the bench scoring, it's Pritchard. And then nobody else is really contributing here. So great to see Sam Hauser, of course, break out in the way he did. But just other guys on the team as well. We're still dealing with some inconsistent personnel in general because no Tatum, no Holiday today. But I would still say it's a positive game from the Celtics overall to have those two guys out to play more of an inconsistent way, or I should say an inconsistent lineup, but maybe some lineups we haven't seen entirely this season just because of all the mixing and matching in the lineups from players being out and players being in. So I still thought it was pretty positive to see the way guys stepped up without Jason Tatum in the lineup.
Yeah, I think Tatum's a premier offensive hub, and I think he can really engine an offense. And everyone talks about his assist totals have been up the last few years, but he just always makes the right read as well. He doesn't always need to get the assist per se, but he really is an elite offensive engine. And when he's not out there, it's been a real issue. And I think part of that is because Brown's a below average offensive engine. And tonight was the first time in a while I thought he didn't have blinders on. I think a lot of times when you see Brown lead a lineup, he's the man, he's the rock star. It's his time to be the lead singer. And that can work if the ball's going in the basket. But I think at times, like I said, he just has blinders on and it's kind of his show and he wants to do everything. And I think tonight he understood that it's better to get everyone involved and you can still be that rock star, but you have to also distribute. And I think that's why he finished with 9 assists. That's an insane Jaylen Brown game, 9 assists that you just don't see that. And there's a reason for that. So I think when you're getting that kind of production from Brown, you should be happy. Because I think on a night-to-night basis, Pritchard's the second best hub of offense on this team, which shouldn't be the case, but it is. And I think part of that is because Brown is inconsistent in that area. And White and Drew can do that at times, but they're not as consistent, especially with their dribbling and what they're able to do. And I think if you're able to allow Brown to take on a little bit more of that burden, you'll start to see these other lineups without Tatum start to flourish more often. I just hope this isn't a one-off and this is a consistent thing with Jaylen because it hasn't been in previous seasons.
Yeah, I'd like to see the consistency of that as well. I really want to see, and I get it. It's early in the season. We're still before 25 games, so there's still some kinks to work out. We're by far a perfect team, but I would like to see the Celtics specifically in those non-Jason Tatum minutes throughout the stretch of a game lock in a little bit more and really kind of get that continuity going, because I just feel like we are just totally lost when Jason Tatum goes to the bench. And there are times, there are bright spots, so I don't want to make it sound like we're the Charlotte Bobcats or anything, but at the same time, championship contending team coming off a championship, trying to defend that. You definitely have to be better. Something the Celtics have to be better at, Seamus, is their perimeter defense. And that's something, as you mentioned earlier, Sam Hauser, it's the first thing he mentioned when he got on the microphone tonight, is their perimeter defense. The Detroit Pistons made this game pretty interesting towards the end of the in that fourth quarter, towards the end of the third, start of that fourth quarter. Malik Beasley got going from distance. Shots opened up for them. Perimeter defense, Celtics were scrambling. Really had a tough time guarding the three. 20 made three-pointers tonight for the Detroit Pistons, which is their season high. Seamus, what do the Celtics need to do to really focus on defending that perimeter? Because if there's a weakness with this team, it's been on the defensive end.
I think the other night in Miami, or I shouldn't say in Miami, but against Miami the other night, they were actually doing a pretty good job in that game of containing the Miami Heat on the perimeter and not letting them penetrate the paint, even inside the paint. They weren't letting Miami get any easy buckets. I believe the first half stats were Miami shot 16% from beyond the arc in the first half, and then they were 9 of 25.
Mm.
9 of 25 inside the paint in the first half the other night, the Miami Heat were. And of course, that's when the Celtics just started to run away with the game. And there were two little dips in that game, the Miami Heat 7-0 runs, but really outside of that, the Celtics just blew them out of the water. And I think I think the Boston Celtics, they just need more effort on that end of the floor. And really, we discussed it a little bit the other night, where is they're more of a calling to be better defensively later in the season for a contending team just coming off a championship, because it does feel at times, both in transition and in the half court, the team, they're just not really crisp in their defensive rotations. They're not really crisp with their footwork on the perimeter, and guys just, they're left open a lot of the times. And it's really just due to the Celtics, their rotations, they're just not all that crisp. And that was the first thing that stood out to me when we played the Denver Nuggets in Abu Dhabi. But I was sitting there looking at it going, these are the first two preseason games. This is not very indicative of the season at all. Yet we're now 22 games in, and we have seen a couple of those problems arise. But there have been games in which we saw, oh, the Celtics, they're actually locking in right now, locking into the defensive end of the floor, and they're actually doing all of the little things in which a good defensive team is able to do to be a good defensive team. And I think the other night in Cleveland, outside of really the fourth quarter when we
Final
allowed
8
43
minutes.
points, I think the Celtics did a good job in that game too. So there were two straight games where they put together a pretty consistent defensive performance. Again, that fourth quarter in Cleveland, not great whatsoever. Donovan Mitchell did hit a couple tough shots down the stretch. Want to give him that. But tonight, definitely scaled back a little bit, especially in the second half. And give credit to the Pistons. They're a young team with a couple of better veterans this year than last year. We think about Tim Hardaway. We think about Tobias Harris. Last year, they really needed some veterans to come in and lead the young guys. Didn't quite happen whatsoever with last year's veterans on the Pistons. And yet this year they have better veterans in there, and they still have their young core, and they are a pretty quick team. I shouldn't say they like to shoot the three ball, because they really shot less threes than the Celtics tonight, but when they're on, they can hit the three ball. They do have a couple of 3-point shooters out there. And the Pistons, I just thought, especially late in the fourth quarter there, it's like too many opportunities wide open on the 3-point arc. And I really do think that links back to effort at times, because we've seen the Celtics last year with the same exact roster, really minus O'Shea Brissett plus Baylor Shireman. Sorry, Justin. Sorry to mention Baylor Shireman on this show so early, but ultimately it's the same team as last year. Last year's team was top 10 in defensive rating. This year they're kind of hovering. They're like, oh, we're kind of outside of it. We're mid of the pack. We're mid-tier defensive team. And then they'll kind of make their way back into it at times of the season. But so far, not a very consistent effort whatsoever. And I really do think that can be linked to effort at times for this team.
Well, I think the effort goes with the rebounding as well. First of all, paint points tonight. Celtics won the paint battle. That's very rare. You see the Celtics win the paint battle. Celtics usually get dominated in the paint. So I want to give the props there for the Celtics winning the paint battle tonight. They were also really aggressive on the offensive glass, which when they're crashing the offensive glass, good luck. Don't give a good 3-point shooting team the chance to get an offensive rebound and make second chance points. Good luck to you. Celtics grab 14 of those bad boys. 14 second chance points tonight. I don't have it in front of me. I wish I had it in front of me. I got the box score in front of me, but I'm looking at that 14. I'm circling that 14. That's an important stat, especially in a game where, yes, at one point was a 20-point game, but for the most part, it hung around 14 points. And I think those are the difference makers. Joe Mazzulla, you hear him all the time, guys, talking about those margins. Celtics won that rebounding margin tonight.
And I think one of the issues with the defense, and I want to go here right now.
Yeah.
Some of the rotations are so inconsistent, it's actually painful.
And you mentioned that.
Yeah. And I don't think some of these guys are ready. And I think we're kind of doing some guys a disservice as well. I think Keita needs to play a little bit more because I think at some point he's going to be relied upon to play in a big spot. And I don't think he plays enough. For example, today you have Tillman who got 8 minutes. That's fine. Cornette got 21. Horford got 30. And Porzingis had 29. And I think if you kind of piece together some Porzingis and Cornette minutes there, you can find room for Keita to just check in and see what he has, especially in a night like tonight against the Pistons, where you are going to beat them most likely, and he should be able to get some positive run. I think Springer looked very good on defense last year, especially on the perimeter. I think his offensive game was bad, and I think some of it was clunky, but at times I thought he had the ability to at least deserve to be on the floor, and he's been a ghost. He just sits on the bench the entire time.
You know what's funny, Xavier? He went to Vegas in Summer League, balled out in 1 or 2 games, and then he sat the rest of Summer League. You barely saw him in the preseason.
Yeah.
With the way they benched him in Summer League, they kind of made it sound like this was going to be like an Avery Bradley type situation where he was going to work his way into the rotation. He didn't even play. He barely played in the preseason. I was sitting there in the preseason, and I'm like, is this the same Jaden Springer we had back in July dominating the Summer League? Because this guy has not touched the court. And it's not like he's down in Maine either. He's a young player. Remember, 21, 22 years old, Xavier. This is your guy we're talking about here. And as you said, yeah, I mean, he's been a ghost. It surprised me that in early October, he was not getting the minutes in preseason.
He's a force defensively. He's that good. I know he's small, but he's a force defensively. And I think some of the offensive struggles were just kind of shot creation. And I think in Summer League, you saw, if nothing else, it looked a little more natural. And here's what drives me nuts. Respectfully to Jordan Walsh, he looks like one of those guys that is frozen for like 100 years, and then you defrost them, and then you put them back into society. He moves like he's a Ken doll. Like all his movements are terrible. He doesn't know what he's doing half the time. And I understand that he's this exciting athlete. He was a 5-star at Arkansas. He had some good moments with the Razorbacks, but at the same time, he is not ready to play basketball. He's an awesome offensive rebounder. He just crashes the glass. He needs seasoning though, because he is too clunky to consistently play. And I understand the athletic profile. I get all that. Trust me. But at the same time, when you watch him on defense, he's routinely in the wrong spot. On offense, he never wants to do anything with the ball. All he wants to do is get rid of it as soon as he touches it. He's a net negative when he's out there, and he gets more of an opportunity than a guy like Springer. Honestly, than a guy like Cade on a night like tonight, who deserves to be out there, and that's what bothers me. And as for Drew Peterson, he didn't really do much today. I don't really understand that as much either. He's a guy that I watched a lot in college. He's a USC guy. I got to see him for 2 years in the then Pac-12. Rest in peace. And I thought he had some good creation ability there. He's a good shooter. Defensively, he's a little bit of a worry, but I thought, especially in the Cleveland game, that he was showing some fight defensively, which made me happy. And he goes from playing 20 minutes, now he's playing 3. He can't even get in the game. It's just one of those things that you want to know what breeds good defense. It's intensity, it's consistency, and it's knowing your personnel. And the last 2 things in particular, the Celtics are not good with. And part of that goes back to coaching. And I think if there's any critique I have of Joe Mazzulla through 22 games, it's at least have some semblance of a rotation that makes logical sense at points. Because I understand you want to trot these guys out at different times. I understand that. There's going to be games guys don't play, and games they do. I truly understand that. But at the same time, he's yanking around their minutes so much. What do we actually expect with some of these bench guys when they come in? How are they supposed to produce if they truly have no idea when they're going to come into the game?
Yeah, I want to add 2 points to that. Number one, Jordan Walsh. I hate to say it, but he's really been one of the most disappointing Celtics this season after what we saw in the preseason. Because what you're talking about in terms of getting rid of the ball from his hands, in the preseason, it looked like, oh, he might be coming along a little bit like, oh, the ball, he feels pretty comfortable.
You would think it's a grenade.
His shot,
like if you in the preseason against the Raptors, there was that moment where, oh, Jordan Walsh, he takes the ball in for the win. Of course, he got blocked, but you love to see that aggression with the ball in his hands. Now, that was with basically a third-string unit against another third-string unit, and maybe that's why he felt more comfortable out there. But we were looking at him in the preseason going, oh, maybe he's coming along a little bit. So far, we haven't seen that in the season whatsoever. Just none. Absolutely none. But to your Keita point, too, this is definitely a matchup Keita could have played in. If you really look at the personnel on the other side of the ball, Jalen Duran, Isaiah Stewart, basically the two big guys playing for the Pistons tonight. Not really perimeter bigs, really not at all. And Keita, those are the type of matchups we can actually play Keita in, because Keita against perimeter bigs, probably not the best matchup in the world, throwing him out on the perimeter, letting guys either shoot over him or drive past him. However, in a night like tonight, where you have two interior bigs you're playing against, Jalen Duran and Isaiah Stewart, who are not going to hurt you from the perimeter whatsoever. They're really
Right.
they're not players you're paying attention to out there. Those are the matchups you can play Keita in. So I agree with that point of Keita definitely maybe should have had a run tonight, even though we had, I mean, Porzingis back in the lineup, of course. Al Horford played, Luke Cornett, Xavier Tillman. It is hard to slot in those players and give them minutes where it makes sense, but I'm a little surprised with how much we're playing Porzingis lately,
Me too.
quite honestly.
Yeah, I
We
was.
just brought him back. I know we think it's a little early, which yes, it's early with the timeline. On the other hand, we don't really know with the medical staff how Porzingis feels. Maybe he feels great. Maybe he feels all right. He was out there a month practicing before he actually came and played a game. So there was a lot of run under him before he actually came out against the Clippers. But I think tonight it's one of those nights where you look at Al Horford 30 minutes, Porzingis 29 minutes. Did they
It's
really need to
it's
play that much in order for us to beat the Pistons? Like even if they played 25 minutes, you're cutting the cutting of the minutes just marginally throughout the season. That can make a difference later on down the line with how much wear and tear, especially Al Horford. You think about his
Hmm.
age. I hate to bring it up, but these guys coming back from injury, and of course Al Horford, the age he is, you want to cut those minutes as much as possible. And tonight with the big man rotation, I thought they definitely could have, or Joe Mazzulla and the coaching staff definitely could have managed that a little bit better tonight. So I would have to agree with your point there on Keita and put him in the game against the Detroit Pistons.
maybe it's Horford getting a few days rest, obviously not playing in that Miami game, but that specifically to me, when I saw 30 minutes played for Al Horford tonight, is that necessary? Is that necessary? Especially at times where, even in this game, I know you guys are trying to push Keita into this rotation tonight, but especially at times when Luke Cornett was on. I mean, come on. Luke Cornett was on tonight. I mean, hey, if there was a player spotlight I would pick other than Sam Hauser, yours would be Jaylen Brown, Seamus. Mine would be Luke Cornett. It's not all about the scoring at times for me, man. Just the effort that Luke Cornett put in tonight. He has 8 blocks in the last 2 games, guys. 8 blocks in the last 2 games. His defense has improved tremendously. He's more so known for that high pick and roll guy on offense since he's been in a Celtic uniform. Tonight comes in, starts stirring the pot. I mean,
Is it a mix, or
and,
is he eating? Is he
and
eating
you know
or is he
what?
mixing? That's a huge debate after tonight's game. Is he mixing it or is he eating?
I both. I think he's mixing and then eating. I think he's dabbling in
Eating the
both.
cookie dough.
And why not, right? Eat the cookie dough, Luke Cornett. If Franco was here, I'd have him hitting the applause button on the soundboard. But in all seriousness, what I've seen from Luke Cornett, specifically these last couple of games, he is just, and we mentioned the struggles defensively from the Celtics, and I said this to Xavier before we hit record tonight. The defense hasn't been good when Luke, in no disrespect to Luke Cornett, we just have so many better defenders on this team than Luke Cornett. The defense has been struggling if Luke Cornett is your best defensive player this week. And that tells you a lot, right? And credit to Luke Cornett for coming in, staying ready. This is a guy who, Keita, who's been playing very solid, has gotten the call over Luke Cornett these past few weeks. So Luke Cornett's been racking up these healthy DNPs recently. So credit to Luke for staying ready and coming out against Miami and Detroit, 2 teams that you should come out and win, and 2 teams that they did. And Cornett played great in both games, specifically here tonight. Also, I thought he held his own on the perimeter. He's not known for his perimeter defense. I thought he was pretty solid on the perimeter tonight. At times that the switch was made. But a little bit to go off you guys' point on Keita, very surprised. And Seamus, we talked about it the first night of that back-to-back against Cleveland, and then after against Miami, or I think it might have been the first game against Cleveland. Keita got cooked by the Cavaliers. Queta got cooked by the Cavaliers. Cavaliers front court plays outside, can't guard the perimeter. Then all of a sudden we see him come back against who was it? Was it Minnesota? It might have been Minnesota. Rudy Gobert plays down low, doesn't play the perimeter. That's a better matchup for Neemias Queta. Tonight, very shocked we didn't see it. We saw a little sprinkle of Xavier Tillman tonight, but for the most part, Celtics stuck with Horford and Porzingis in heavy minutes. And to go off, also talk about Al Horford coming off rest from the Miami game. Guys, he played 30 minutes against the Detroit Pistons. We have 5 games in 7 nights this week. Do you really think that the 30-minute game would have came against the Detroit Pistons out of all the teams that we're going to play? We're about to play the Milwaukee Bucks on a first night of a back-to-back, Zach Edey, Jaren Jackson Jr. on a second night of a back-to-back, and then obviously we play Cleveland and Miami and Bam Adebayo and Jared Allen, Evan Mobley to start. Do you really think that we needed 30 minutes of Al Horford against Jaren Duran out of all the centers that we were going to see this week?
Let me add another point to this too. Durant played 25 minutes tonight. Isaiah Stewart played 22. So if you really add that up, it's like the Pistons. It's not like they had a bunch of big guys out there 24/7.
Right.
They just didn't. I mean, if you really look at their lineups, those big guys played less and they're younger.
Yeah.
They're younger.
Yeah, I think 2 issues with the big men rotation. One, Porzingis doesn't need to play as much, obviously. I think that's a problem. Horford playing 30 minutes isn't even beneficial. I think what I've noticed from Al this year, he gives you a really good 20 to 24-ish minutes. And then when it goes beyond that, he has some really low lights, especially this year. I've noticed this. I haven't really seen this in prior years. He always has had the off game or two, but there's stretches in these games this year where he's just getting cooked consistently. And you expect that. He's older now, and that's what happens. And I think it'd be more beneficial if you sprinkled in the Queta, Cornette, Tillman. And the other thing is, too, those 3 guys, the Tillman, Cornette, and Queta, they're going to be relied upon, as I mentioned earlier. And you can't play Tillman like Al Horford. I'm sick of seeing it. It worked in one finals game. That's awesome. Stop doing it. He's not the guy who he was in Memphis. He's not playing like it right now. I text it all the time, and it drives me nuts. Because if you watched him in Memphis and if you watched him at Michigan State, it's like a totally different guy than you're seeing right now in Boston. And he looks terrible in this role. And I understand that if it's a project that this is going to be a slow build and eventually is going to turn into Al Horford, I'll be the first one with my hand up and apologize. But I just think it's kind of bizarre that you're having this guy who had a totally different skill set kind of audition to be the next Al Horford. I just think that's objectively weird.
Although it's the look. It's like you really need
that's
glasses.
Half of it, I guess.
You need glasses sometimes to go, wait a minute, is it Al Horford or Tillman out here? I can't really tell. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
It's like when it comes to Tillman and like Horford, it's like usually you can identify the player not only off their looks, but like just off the number. It feels like I just totally ignore the jersey number when Tillman and Horford are on the court together. I can't tell the difference between the two. But would it be dumb of me to suggest that if you're not going to play Xavier Tillman, send him down to Maine? Would that be dumb?
I think
you're not going to, if you're not
to do that.
Yeah, he's a little too old. A little too old.
I mean, even just to practice with the guy. I mean, if the guy's just going to sit on the bench, I don't think he's too old at all. How old is he?
He's 25.
I think he's too tenured.
Right, he's not too old. You like what Xavier said.
Or Malik Beasley, Michael Beasley in the NBA somewhere. I think
if you send him to Maine to just be Al Horford, be my guest. If the idea is you're going to send him down there every night, all he's going to do is shoot corner threes and distribute. I guess go ahead.
Yeah,
but if he's just going to be the guy that was a defensive menace who gave Anthony Davis fits in a playoff series with Memphis, and just send him down to the G League to be that guy, I don't see what the point is, because he could be that guy with Boston. You just don't play him like that, and it's annoying.
What's his career 3-point percentage? 20.
He doesn't. He never took them at Michigan State or in Memphis. It's not good. Whatever it is, it's terrible. I can tell you that right now.
I look at the highlights and I'll never forget the highlights coming into Boston, and everybody posts, "Oh, welcome to Boston, Xavier Tillman." It's all him dominating in the paint. It's all him down low,
Yes,
all him blocking shots, and an undersized center, yet with a great wingspan and a great sense of physicality and awareness down low. And then you look at it, and he's sitting in the corner outside, stretching the floor, missing wide open corner threes.
So yeah, we career wise, he's 26.2% for his career.
And all he does is stand in the
hear
corner
this
when he's
season.
up
He's
there.
20% this season. So 1 out of every 5 threes he's hitting this season. That's
I
not
also
great. Not great at all.
I feel as if it's also lowered his confidence when he
It
does
has,
get down
yes.
low. Because when he gets, and I tell this to Rob all the time, and I really like Xavier Tillman, and I do believe in Xavier Tillman, but the role in which he's playing with this team, you're right, Xavier, it's totally the opposite of what he played just last year in Memphis. I say this to Rob all the time. I'm like, Xavier Tillman, when he gets in the lane, he's going a million miles an hour. I mean, he can't even bounce the ball. He can't even catch the ball down in the paint. It just he's wild with it, and you did not see that in Memphis. He was comfortable because that's where he was. Now he's playing that perimeter ball, trying to space the floor for the Celtics, and it's just not working out when he's in there. And it turns out to be a very negative thing for Boston. And I hate to be so critical and hateful on him, but that's just the reality of it.
It's not his fault, yeah.
See, there is this false sense that he is a perimeter big, although we've put him in the corner and he's leaked out to the corner a million times. And game 3, he did hit crucial 3-point shots from beyond the arc there. However, if you really look at the full sample size of Xavier Tillman, yes, he can be a good 3-point shooter in small samples, but the large sample is really what's to be looked at in basketball players. And here, more stats for you guys here. So, freshman year at Michigan State, which was 17-18, right? Played 35 games. Now he only played 8 minutes per game. Didn't attempt a 3 all season. Doesn't even have a percentage. Didn't attempt a 3 despite playing 35 games. Again, only 8 minutes per game. But then the next 2 seasons, he shoots 29% from 3 in 39 games and then 26% from 3 in 31 games. So that's his college resume. Now going to the NBA, I already gave his career and this season. I can't find his Memphis stats here because my computer just decided to crash on me. But you guys get the point here. Big sample size of Xavier Tillman, not exactly the greatest 3-point shooter. He's not even he hasn't shot above 30%. And we're really, it's not about shooting 30%. It's really, we want guys shooting 35, which is about the average. Yeah. And the average is kind of going up nowadays, like 35, 36, 37. We want guys shooting at least average or better. And he's not even shooting 30%, much less this season. I mean, he's barely over 20 right now. So there is a little bit of a false sense of Xavier Tillman for sure being a perimeter-oriented player, and that's how we like to play him. And yes, the ideal scenario is, he's our next Al Horford, but Al Horford, he has a large sample size of being a pretty good 3-point shooter. Now, some of those numbers may have come down in the last couple of years considering Al's age and just general wear and tear on his body and however the Celtics play in terms of who's actually shooting the ball at what given times and where those shots are coming from. But Xavier Tillman, I go back on Xavier's point of just consistent personnel in the lineup, period. I want to see Xavier Tillman. There are just too many moments where I just feel like his presence is random. I really do. Because you think in certain spots, what are you using Xavier Tillman for exactly out there when you have Keita, when you have Cornet? And this is almost one of those half-baked ideas where you're going, wait a minute, where you start talking about it and go, is Xavier Tillman maybe trade bait at the deadline? I'm not saying we're going to fetch a whole bunch out of him, but maybe there's another player out there we could swap him for salary-wise that would fit a little bit better within the rotation, because I really do feel like his presence on the court is simply random when you have these other bigs, whether it's Porzingis. Now this year, of course, Porzingis missed a lot of time. Give him that right there. But you have Porzingis, you have Horford out there as your perimeter-oriented bigs, and then you have Cornet and Keita, who are not so much perimeter-oriented. They're more interior-oriented bigs. It's like, where does Xavier Tillman fit into that rotation? He's your fifth. I shouldn't say he's your fifth big if you're the Celtics, but in terms of all the bigs, feels like they've been using Keita and Cornette more consistently than they have Tillman this year. And
Mm,
I would just like to see Tillman actually carve out a consistent spot on this team, even if it's, oh, yeah, he's playing 5 minutes, he's playing 7 minutes, he's playing here or there, but we're using him for a specific purpose in this particular
right,
way. Feels like,
right.
yes, we'll use him 5 to 7 minutes, 5, 8 minutes, might get 10 minutes on a night, but those opportunities will come few and far between. And that's just, I don't necessarily understand it.
Gets cooked on the perimeter too. I haven't been the biggest fan. I shouldn't say I haven't been the biggest fan of Xavier Tillman's. I haven't been a biggest fan of Xavier Tillman's role this year. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's doing the best he can at this role. This is a very new thing for him, but it's kind of interesting how like the Celtics have handled their backup big guys. Where like coming into Boston, Luke Cornett was strictly like this stretch five, like shoots the lights out from distance. Like I believe he's NCAA's best shooting big man from behind the arc. I believe he was. And then Xavier Tillman, post dominant basketball player down low, comes in and now he's playing that stretch big role and it's not working out well for him. And Luke Cornett's more of that inside presence. Hasn't attempted a 3 in 2 years. I think he took maybe one last year and he drilled it in Milwaukee. But it's kind of interesting to see how Boston's handle those big men situations.
Well, just add on here, Xavier Tillman. He's only shot over 30% once in one season in his NBA career. That was his rookie year. He shot 33%. All of the other years, he's been below 30%. But guys, guess what? He's 100% from three in the playoffs last year.
Yeah,
crazy enough, 100%. That's where we get the narratives from. And all it takes is one good playoff run. All it takes is a couple good games. All it takes really game 3 in the NBA Finals to think, oh yeah, Xavier Tillman from 3. Yeah, it's gonna work. But 100% from 3 in the playoffs. Other than that, pretty much below 30% 3-point shooter. Not great at all. Not great.
I'd like to see how Boston. I'm going to shift this focus because we are getting towards the back half and the end of our program here. I do want to shift focus to Milwaukee on Friday night. Milwaukee, I think they lost tonight. They were losing when we started the show. They were down pretty by double digits tonight against Atlanta. Celtics host Milwaukee on Friday, first night of a back-to-back for them, for us rather. And this is going to be our third game against Milwaukee, guys, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I don't like playing teams that we're most likely going to see in the postseason, or at least going to be competing with in the postseason. I don't like seeing half our matchups done in November, like more than half our matchups. I remember one year, last year, it felt like we played New York 5 times, and like 4 to 5 times were before the All-Star break. And we, same thing against Cleveland and Miami last year as well. So I'm not the biggest fan about this, but because it's like both these teams could be totally different come April. Like we've seen Milwaukee 3 times. Celtics beat Milwaukee 3-1 in the season series. Yeah, but 3 out of 4 games were in October and November. So
That's what happened to the Mavericks last year, remember? It's like we faced the Mavericks twice in the regular season, but by the finals, like, wait, this is a whole different team.
Right. But we are living in the moment now. We do have to focus on what we have and what Milwaukee has on Friday night. X, we'll start with you, a little preview towards this game. Going to be interesting also to see what the rotations. You've been big on Joe's rotations this episode. Going to be interesting to see how Joe handles the rotations against the Milwaukee Bucks on Friday night.
Yeah, I assume he gives the best guys the run on Friday. I think we've seen that throughout most of the season. In the bigger games, the best guys tend to get the most run. Don't expect a ton of Neemias Queta unless the matchups call for it. And one of those things that I'm looking forward to is who's the other guy for Milwaukee, because they tend to lose constantly, regardless if Giannis and Dame have big games. They usually need a third guy to step up. And they don't always need that against these teams like Washington and Detroit and let me see, Miami during this win streak. I was just going through their recent win streak. But against Boston, they are going to need at least another guy or two to figure it out. And I think that's the key for Boston. Can you just limit Giannis and Dame enough that another guy's going to have to beat you. And I think they're going to do fine with that. Milwaukee's a fraudulent team to me. They're not as bad as their early season record showed. They're not as good as their recent run showed either.
That's literally they're right where their record is now. It's like it's like it evens out a little bit.
I wouldn't say they're fraudulent in terms of I think their window has closed. I think that's how I look. I'm not saying you're wrong, X. I'm just saying how I view it. I think their window's closed. And I mentioned to you earlier, it's like, man, I hope the Celtics don't do what like teams like the Lakers and in Brooklyn and Milwaukee do, where it's like they don't accept the rebuild and they just go sign a bunch of has-beens and older players. And instead of rebuilding and getting younger, they're rebuilding and getting older. And the rebuilding is not rebuilding in the right direction. Like, I hope the Celtics don't go out and sign a 40-year-old DeAndre Jordan and Reggie Jackson. And that just isn't going to do anything for them, but I just wanted to I just feel like their window closed necessarily, X.
Well, it's all the part of the problem with these contending teams falling out of contention is they often make a move in which adds a salary onto their books that is just not sustainable in filling out the rest of the roster. You go down the list. The Lakers, they make a move where they're trading KCP and Montrezl Harrell for Russell Westbrook. They're trading all their depth, Kyle Kuzma as well. They're trading all their depth for Russell Westbrook, who's making over $40 million, and we all know his value wasn't at that point at that point in time. And then you look at the Milwaukee Bucks. Who do they go and trade for? They trade all their depth away for Damian Lillard, over 30 point guard, making $40 million. They can't fill out the rest of the roster, and it's just like, oh, they don't really have any depth. Same thing happened with the Lakers back in 21 and 22. And then two, you look at the Denver Nuggets right now. I'll throw them out there. It's not necessarily an over 30 point guard that they're paying $40 million to. It's Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter Jr., they decided, oh, yeah, sure, we'll give you the rookie max. And then afterwards, they don't pay KCP, and they're left with this roster of, okay, you're paying Michael Porter Jr. as a near max guy in the NBA when Michael Porter Jr. just isn't that type of guy. He's just a glorified role player, borderline starter, really. And yeah, sure, he's a okay starter, but on the Celtics, would he start on the Celtics? Likely not. And he's making $40 million for the Denver Nuggets. So it's always these teams who just make that essentially $40+ million deal, whether it's trading away all their depth, or signing a player who simply doesn't deserve that money. And it just affects their ability to round out the rest of the rotation. That is going to be a question with the Celtics coming up in the next couple of years, because they're paying a ton of money to Brown, Tatum. They gave Holiday the extension. They gave Derek White the extension. They gave Kristaps Porzingis his money. And with all those guys making a pretty big bill, we are already starting to see it off the bench this season. Now, we've had sort of the same bench as we did last year, really minus O'Shea Brissett. But when Peyton Pritchard is up, when Sam Hauser's up, really the thing we're lucky about right now is Peyton Pritchard. His contract is just, it's becoming one of the most valuable contracts in all of the NBA. He's making what? $6 million this year for the sixth man of the year. I mean, that is a huge boost. But that's also part of why we weren't able to fit Lonnie Walker onto the books. We couldn't find a trade for Jaden Springer at the beginning of the season. I wholeheartedly believe Brad Stevens was calling pretty much every team in the league trying to ship Jaden Springer's $4 million off the books, because we all know he's the 8th highest paid Celtic. He's not the 8th best Celtic. I mean, he can't even get into the rotation, can't get more than 2 minutes the other night when half the main Celtics are seemingly out on the court, and even in Cleveland too. Can't get into the game at all. He's the 8th highest paid player on the Celtics. I hate to trash on Jaden Springer here, because a lot of people have some optimism for him. And Xavier said it earlier. He can be a menace on defense, but the offensive game just isn't there whatsoever. And clearly there's something behind the scenes that Joe Mazzulla and the coaching staff doesn't trust. But we keep him after we can't find a trade partner for him and cut Lonnie Walker. And that was what was driving me nuts about Lonnie Walker is we could have got him on a legitimately bargain deal because of his talent last year we saw in Brooklyn. And of course, he's one of those players that kind of got cut out with the new CBA. All these teams essentially, we're We're going to keep our 15th roster spot open. We're not going to add extra money because it's going to send us over X apron, and the luxury tax is even harder on us this year. He gets cut out of the league essentially, but we could have had a bargain deal on that player, on Lonnie Walker. Doesn't happen. We end up keeping Springer, and it's like, yeah, the Celtics bench depth, it's going to be a question in the years to come with all the players at the top making the money in which they do. I think eventually we're going to see somebody. I hate to say this in a random Wednesday post game after we beat the Detroit Pistons, and we're all happy here, but there's somebody out of the top 5. I know we call it a top 6 without Horford, but cut him out of the equation real quick. The top 5: Porzingis, White, Holiday, Brown, Tatum. There's going to be somebody out of that group. It's likely not Tatum. Probably Brown. Probably not going to be here in a couple of years
White
because of the bill we're paying, and that is when we get into that territory of the Bucks, the Lakers, and of course the Nuggets, where they're contending teams who have all won championships, but to really keep that core together, it's a question. But I know we're talking about the Milwaukee Bucks right now. They're really in that situation already. Seems like Damian Lillard and Giannis, they can go off any single night, but I totally agree with Xavier again, where they need that third player. And most often this year, it's been Brook Lopez. And we've been talking about the big man rotation a lot in this post-game show. So to see what they actually throw at Brook Lopez, because Brook Lopez, he's on kind of the back end of his career, you'd say. But he does have some nights where, oh my goodness, he's blocking every single shot out there. Oh my goodness, he's hitting these 30-foot threes. And Brook Lopez, he can be a pretty all right paint scorer as well. So how the Celtics deal with that on whichever night, Friday night, I would say, right? Friday night will certainly be interesting to see, because the rest of the Bucks rotation, it's a lot of minimum or unproven guys that just don't really scare me as a Celtics fan, Celtics analyst at all. The Celtics, they definitely have the upper hand in the Bucks series now, but the top 3 guys on the Bucks roster, Giannis, Lillard, and even Brook Lopez, they can really hurt you if you're not really matched up with them well.
Seamus, you just screwed us. You just said you're not afraid of any Bucks role player. That means AJ Green's going to come in and drop 30.
Give me a break. No,
if that guy keeps calling himself Derry Bird, I want him out of the NBA. I'm not kidding. That is the most disrespectful
Andre Jackson
I've ever seen.
Pat Connaughton.
I
already had his moment against 2019 at the Garden, Game 3. Pat Connaughton, the image is still there in my head, where we're just the 2018-19 Celtics are falling apart in front of our eyes, and who's at the precipice of it? Oh, Pat Connaughton, local hometown kid from the England area. I know the Bucks. Well, I don't want to make a guarantee on here, Justin, but Friday night we bring another level to the Milwaukee Bucks. They've given us some trouble this year twice, okay? But guess what happened in the late portions of those games? Celtics won.
I think,
but Celtics won. Just saying.
I think it's gonna be interesting. I'd be pretty amped if the Celtics go up 3-0.
We're done being scared of the Milwaukee Bucks.
I don't think it's necessarily being scared against the Milwaukee Bucks. I just think they've always presented a tougher matchup to us. I think I've never been, and this isn't me being cocky, this isn't me being a homer. Like, the Milwaukee Bucks have never scared me. Like, I've never sat here and been like, ooh, like I'm petrified of playing them. You know what I'm petrified of? Teams like the Orlando Magic, teams like the Indiana Pacers. Those are the teams I go in and I'm like, ugh, like, can we just not play this game today? Those are the teams that I am scared that Justin Love.
No, we're right now, we are the chase. Now, this is what I want to make clear here. In recent years, we were petrified of teams. It's okay to admit that.
I'm not.
When we're chasing other teams, like, this team's coming to the Garden. We are that team now. That other teams, fan bases they face and go.
I'm not saying that.
Boston tonight. Boston.
Let's compare. Right now. If Milwaukee's on your schedule for a first round, or Indiana, who are you scared of? Who are you more scared
Milwaukee.
of? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have I'm more Giannis
That's
versus,
what I'm scared of more than anything.
That was a terrible example. That was Indiana terrible. Tyrese Halliburton's having a terrible year. Orlando.
I still feel like Milwaukee and
Franz and
Orlando.
Paolo don't know how to play with each other. They've
Orla-
never shown it ever.
But the only thing about Orlando
I think they
is
present the tougher matchup, man. I don't know.
they might in the long run for sure, but we need to see it.
It's
Yeah.
something
We need to
about
see
these,
it.
It's something about these tough, young, gritty teams. Nothing to lose, everything to gain. That's the type of teams that frighten me the most. Those
I'll say
doesn't
this:
matter, regular
Justin,
season playoffs. Those are the teams.
if
Indiana last year, we swept them. They were the toughest matchup we had. Injuries
Yeah.
aside, they were the toughest matchup we had.
if Paolo comes back and Franz is still the same offensive hub, and those two guys figure out how to play off of each other, I think they're probably the scariest matchup for Boston. But it's never really been a sustainable
It hasn't been proven
combination
yet.
with those two
It hasn't
for a
been proven.
prolonged period of time. It just hasn't.
And
So-
Paolo comes out playing like an MVP this year. Franz, who played like an MVP type of player last year, or maybe not MVP, you guys know what I'm talking about, all-star player last year, comes in struggling. I mean, this guy couldn't hit water on a boat on a rainy day to start the season. This guy, he was struggling. Now, Paolo goes out this past month. Franz,
He's an all-NBA player right now.
Right,
Season
right.
ended tomorrow.
So I do agree with you. We do need to see the consistency, but the topic of this conversation is on the Milwaukee Bucks, who we will be seeing on Friday night. Go ahead, Seamus. Go ahead.
Let me add another one to this. Between
ahead.
Orlando, Indiana, Milwaukee. Best player in the series versus Orlando, Jason Tatum. Best player in the series versus Indiana, Jason Tatum. Best player in the series versus Milwaukee, probably Giannis.
Yeah,
That's what's scary about Milwaukee. I don't really fear Milwaukee over those
But we have
other
Al Horford,
teams.
though.
I think we can beat all of those teams. Really, I think Orlando is the wild
Dude,
card
Neva's
because
good.
their potential ceiling is much higher for sure. But in terms of best player in the series and who you're going to have to deal with, like Giannis, still MVP caliber player, still one of the best players in the entire NBA, at least top 3. So in that regard, yes, the Milwaukee Bucks still to be, we're not scared of them, but still got to watch out, of course.
Celtics. Well, you got to keep an eye on them because they are rising up in the standings, but at the same time, right now, they're fighting. They're kind of in that playing area. That's not a. That's
It
I
might be a
like,
first round matchup, 2-7.
I wouldn't. Yeah, man.
1-8.
I don't know if I'd like to see Giannis in the first round necessarily for sure, but the Celtics have a regular season game against Giannis on Friday night. It's always fun when you get to see the Celtics and Bucks square away on ESPN. Tatum and Giannis going at it, 2 MVP caliber players so far this season. Hopefully JT is rested up and ready to go, as well as Drew Holiday. Sam Hauser tonight, guys, your SeatGeek player of the game tonight, scoring 20 points. I was going to say off the bench, but he started tonight in place of Jason Tatum, knocked down 5 threes on a very efficient 7 of 12 shooting from the floor. SeatGeek, use code Celtics Weekly at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Celtics have won their second straight game. They improved to 18-4 on the regular season. We'll catch you guys on Friday night. For Xavier, Seamus, I'm Justin Lowe. We'll see you on Friday night for Celtics postgame live against the Milwaukee Bucks.